Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today, by request, we're going to talk about my board return system on the edger. I've had a lot of questions about it, so we're going to go in detail about this a little bit. So it's the end of the day here and I have a few extra minutes, so I figured I'd shoot this video because I've had a lot of people ask me questions about my board return from my video about the lumber edger and how it works. A lot of people interested, wanted to see a little bit more detail about the board return. So I will start from the beginning and walk you through how this works. Full disclosure, this is kind of like a beta version. I kind of pride myself in my fabricating ability. I've done a lot of different things around here. I shop build a lot of our stuff at the sawmill and on the tree farm. And I like to make kind of a professional, good looking product. I want it to function, number one, and I want it to look decent and not look like a hack job, if I'm being totally honest. This board return, when you get up close and personal, it's not my finest work because it's one of those projects where I kind of started and piece by piece as I got into it and realized, okay, so now I have to make this adjustment to make that work. And I just kind of worked my way through it. And my whole goal was to see, will this concept even work? Before I go sink a ton of money into this, can I make it work? So a lot of it was originally pieced together with stuff I had laying around, then I had to make some modifications, and so it's kind of a Frankenstein system. But let's get into it and I'll show you what I mean. So it all starts here at the front of the edger, and if you haven't watched my video on what is a lumber edger and how does it work, I'll link to it here. I highly recommend watching that first because this will all make more sense. So I have outside air here from the air compressor that's inside this shop. It's just a 60-gallon air compressor, upright air compressor. This doesn't take a ton of air, but you need a decent sized air compressor. So I have my own regulator out here just so I can control my air pressure at that outlet. So I use this air for blowing stuff off and pumping up tires out here on this side of the building. And but mainly, the main use it gets used for more than anything is to control the air table. So I have this valve here. Now I originally started with a valve I had on hand, a surplus valve, and it worked fine, but it had a little bit of an air leak, so I ended up replacing it. And the one thing I did find, well, I may be getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let's trigger the table and we'll work from the start back. So obviously that puts it up, this puts it down. You didn't get to see that, so I'll slow it down. Oh. You can hear the air compressor just kicked on. So you can see the cylinder under there. That is not what I started with. I had a small air cylinder on hand here originally, and I wanted to use that because, like I said, I wasn't trying to spend a fortune. I just wanted to see if this thing would work. And originally it did, so I welded up this frame. This is out of square tubing. I had this, I guess it's probably about 1.5 by 1.5 square tubing. I had this stuff on hand, so that's what I used, trying to save cost. So I welded up just a simple frame, kind of just picture a door. And I just have hinges welded in along the bottom. Very simple, nothing remarkable there. And I originally sheeted it with a sheet of 1/4 inch plywood because I knew I was trying to keep weight down, and I knew my cylinder wasn't huge, so I was trying to keep it lightweight. So I used 1/4 inch plywood, and my first attempts, it worked good. The cylinder worked fine. But what I found was the plywood wasn't slick enough. It just, boards would hang up and I was having trouble. I tried lubing it up, didn't work. So then I got these sheets, UHMW sheets. It's it's a really slick plastic substance. They're made to have low coefficient of friction, so they slide. So I mounted these onto the 1/4-inch plywood. Well, that worked okay for a little bit. The problem was that 1/4-inch plywood wasn't stiff enough, and I had these glued down, and then the 1/4-inch plywood started to get wavy and these sheets would pop off. So that was a problem. So then I had to upgrade to 1/2-inch plywood, which that works fine, but now my air cylinder wasn't powerful enough. I had too much weight. When I had a couple boards on here, it wouldn't do it. So you know how this stuff goes. If you've ever tried to fab something, you end up chasing your tail. I ended up cutting out the old cylinder. You can see there I had a bracket. This was all self-contained originally. I had a mounting bracket there for the original cylinder, which was much smaller, so it was actually attached to this framework. Well, I had to cut that out. This cylinder is much bigger. I didn't want to tear this all out of the mill, and I didn't want to bring the welder in here because we're essentially on a pile of sawdust. So I cut out the old mounting bracket. I put in a heavy beam here in the bottom, and I bolted to that. So that's been going for about a year, and it's got some give in it, but it's holed up. Eventually, this whole framework under here will probably be pulled out, replaced with steel, done up nice. But it's one of those situations, if it's not broke, I'm not going to fix it. So it's working for me here, what I have kind of pieced together little by little. So the other thing I'll tell you about this air cylinder, I originally had this set up single stage. So I had an air line here, and that port was just plugged. And you can do that. They're supposed to run that way, because what happens, it triggers. When you hit your trigger, it pumps air into the cylinder, and when you release it, it just releases out to the atmosphere. The way that switch works, you know, it just dumps the air pressure. And that works okay, except what I found was, over time, you know, when you trigger this a lot, you build up pressure. Pressure goes past the rings, and you end up airlocking the cylinder, and then it kind of gets jammed up on you. So then I made it two-way. And the other thing I did, what I found out with the little cylinder, I originally had this with a little 1/4-inch clear hose. I found upgrading to a bigger regular air hose, you get more flow, you get more response, it works better. So I made it two-way, and going back to that switch there, obviously it just pushes air one way, and then when you flip it, it pushes air the other way. So it comes down, it moves much faster now because it's actually powered down, powered up and powered down, which works much better. That's the way I'd recommend it. You get faster cycle times. And to control that powered down, I had to take some old tractor tires here and cut them just to give it something to bounce off of, so it wasn't just beating itself to pieces. So that's the underlying principles behind the air table. It's nothing super complicated, but hopefully those few tips there, if you ever want to try to replicate this, you know, might save you some hassle. And as far as what it takes to make this work on the edger side of things, Baker makes a power out feed for their edgers. I bought this edger new, but I didn't get the powered out feed because at the time I wasn't quite sure how I was using it, and I didn't think I needed it, and to be honest, I didn't want to spend the extra money. So then I set on a quest here once I got the edger and decided how I wanted to set up this board return. I'd just make my own. So this is the last drum here of the feed belt. This is hydraulically powered, and I realized there was enough room in here from the pillow block and bearing. I could get a sprocket, so I tapped power from that, and then I just put in a system here of pillow blocks and sprockets and, you know, just a chain drive. So I welded sprockets in on each of these. These were just dead rollers, just idle rollers. So I welded in a sprocket on all these, just made it a simple chain drive. Then the problem with that was the boards would come out and they get to the tipping point and they tip onto the table, and there wasn't enough contact here to push them clear. So then I needed a press roll. So then I took an old section of roller table I had, put a hinge on it, welded a hinge and bracket, bolted it to the edger frame, and now I have this press roll that pushes pressure against the board and sends it clear. And that takes care of that. And this can be folded up like that, the hydraulics in the gas tank, and to clean out under there, because these edgers make a terrible mess with all these strips that come off of them. So like I said, as you can see, you just kind of chase your tail with this stuff. You go from one problem to the next until you get it sorted out. But that being said, this has worked pretty well for me. I've been running it here over a year with no major problems. The other thing I will say, the conveyor is pretty straightforward. It's just a surplus conveyor I bought. I linked two sections together. I had a gearbox and motor from another project, so I just stole them and fabbed that all up and just made this cover to cover them up. That covers the sprockets and chains that link these two together. This obviously is to catch boards that flip over, so they don't just flip off the side. It's just a backstop. So I would highly recommend belt conveyors for a system like this. I had a section roller conveyor just like this, powered rollers. Problem with these powered rollers is they slip. The boards will end up sitting there, and then if you get those little strips from the edger, they get in there and jam up. They create log jams. So that was no good. That had to come out, and I replaced it with belt conveyors. And this is just a little guard. I kept having stuff kind of kick off the side and down between the edger and the conveyor, so I just took an old piece of metal roofing and made this little guard with a diverter here. So that's the kind of stuff you're going to have to fab up as you go, see how the material flows and adjust from there. And then I definitely recommend a section of dead rolls. It's kind of what I call a catch table. So when that stuff comes down, it stops here. You don't want powered rollers all the way to the end, then you got to try to catch it on the fly. You end up with a big mess on your hands. So there's a 10-foot section of dead roll, so the stuff just comes out and then it just comes to a stop here that you can pick it up nice. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about this. I hope that clears up some questions you guys had. You know, I'm glad to help you out here any way I can. Like I said, I learned this stuff kind of the hard way. I enjoy fooling around, tinkering with this stuff. And if you like stuff like this, make sure you subscribe, because I'll show you a few more of my Frankenstein inventions here coming up this fall. We got some neat projects coming. So thanks for watching, guys. Catch you later.